we are going to be talking about how to be a tech-savvy parent and educator, and I'll throw in professional as well, just in case you are not fall in one of those categories. So, grandparent, human, how to be a tech-savvy human, I think will just encompass everyone.
The biggest thing is that there's so much technology coming at you, and trying to stay ahead of it doesn't work, but at least trying to keep up with where your kids are at is a good goal. And oftentimes, somebody said in a panel earlier, oftentimes you can solicit their assistance. They may know more than you, and ask them how does this work? How does my 2-year-old showed me something on, my grandson 2-year-old showed me something on how to swipe and change the screens on my phone, and he didn't even do it intentionally, but you can, ask your kids. That creates a conversation with them that will help.
And I would say growing, just putting yourself in spaces where you are continually learning. And for a lot of us, if you're on social media in any way, to be able to follow organizations that are constantly providing updates and resources, that way you're learning along the way, and it's not so like, I've got to learn this and I'm going to go out and I'm going to spend hours, and it just becomes part of your daily diet that you're touching in on what kids experiences and what apps they're using and that sort of thing.
But what about when our kids do know more than us and they're using it kind of to keep us in the dark as the educators, the professionals? What would you say then for the parents and the parents and educators who are trying to stay up, they're trying to be tech savvy, but our kids are just kind of 10 steps ahead of us on that?
I don't know that the kids are trying to keep us in the dark per se. I wouldn't want to bridge the gap between parents and educators and kids. I think that if you're curious and you're asking them, hey, I heard about this new tool, I don't know anything about it, they'll give you quickly, whether it's something that they're behind or not. We've heard a lot of horror stories about Ask FM, and yet no one in the circles that I've dealt with personally have had a lot of use cases of that. So I think it's like we get too afraid of the next article that talks about something bad happening in technology, and if your kids really are 10 steps ahead, ask them. And if they start to say something that you don't like, then you can spend your time researching.
For those of you, the people on the panel who are kind of in that tech security world, what do you say about that to kids who maybe are accessing apps and things that, we don't always know about, but they're accessing them. But again, you still want to be a very tech savvy and aware educator and professional.
I would say know the resources available to you and become really invested in your own digital literacy. So in addition to knowing resources that are available to you, we all know that we can Google how to fix a bike tire, or we can Google how to fix a washing machine or watch a YouTube video on it. But additionally, we can Google, how do I prevent my kids from downloading malicious software? Or how do I manage explicit content from showing up in the classroom when I'm trying to use technology as a tool for teaching. So know the resources available to you and know how to use those resources, how to use the controls that are at your fingertips and that are built into most browsers.
What would you say is what are some of the concerns, or what are some of the issues that you're seeing come up as a result of our kids and our professionals and our educators being so saturated in the tech world?
What I see
some of those major concerns.
So I see the runaway train aspect of this thing, where the kids were 12 4 years ago, and now they're 16, and the thought of them having any limit on anything is so out of left field. The thought that the apps might go off at 10 o'clock so that they could get some sleep, or maybe mom's going to say, I don't want you to have Ask FM. I think the parents, getting involved a little bit late. I see from taking these calls, I was mentioning on the other panel, I hear kids screaming in the background really loudly, and it's not fake. They feel like a big part of their life is going away when the apps disappear off their phone. So I see the runaway train phenomenon in action with parents who kind of, no fault of anyone, because everybody was getting smartphones and all these apps were coming out and everyone was jumping in on it. In hindsight, now we're dealing with some of the ramifications of kids who have had unfettered access. And if you think about just basic TV and radio, those provide, your kids can watch NBC, and there's going to be certain constraints on it, right? This doesn't exist, and we're sort of learning this in hindsight.
Yeah, so I have some results from a 2016 global parent survey that we conducted. And so it was about 6,000 plus parents with children between ages 3 and 16. And some of the interesting data here is really the discrepancy in the data. So like you mentioned, the average age when a kid gets access to the internet is 9 years old. And 22% of children accessing the internet use it across at least 2 devices. So this is a quite tech-savvy generation. But when you look at the responses from parents in the United States, their main concerns are around downloading malicious software and apps, or talking or making contact with strangers on the internet. So 47% say that the most common problem is downloading malicious apps. 77% say they discuss sharing personal information with strangers with their kids. 30% say their biggest fear is contact with strangers. But then you look at the stats around how many parents know about Google Safe Search, for example, and how many parents report using restricted user profiles in Chrome. And those numbers are 50% and 30% respectively. So clearly there's a gap between what parents fear, what they're concerned about, and what they know about. And really bridging that gap is part of the work that we do in going to different communities and doing outreach. Just making people more aware of the resources available to them, and that a simple search can lead you to a support page where it'll take you through step-by-step instructions on how to prevent your children from downloading malicious apps, for example.
But in the positive, good light, Gen Z is known at 39% to be more concerned about privacy than any other generation that came before them. So we've got, on the one hand, parents who are very worried and educators who are very worried, and it makes sense. I mean, the internet's no different than a neighborhood. There are parts of it that are great and safe, and that's where your kids should play, and then there are parts that are not safe. And I think that it's like, some of it also is just educating your child on the concept of digital citizenship and digital empathy, and what responsibilities we have when we go into different neighborhoods in the real world, and parallel them with what happens in the online world, because they're not actually as different as we like to think.
Yeah. This idea that there's a discrepancy in what's happening and what parents know and what educators know, and would you say that one of the factors to that discrepancy is maybe fear? And fear that I don't know anything because I'm older than this generation, and so I'm just lost, and I don't want to go on Google and go through all the A through Z tips because I don't even really like tech myself, and I'm just like, what do I do?
So I think it's literacy, like any form of literacy. Digital literacy is something that you kind of have to become familiar with over time and really practice that. So whenever my mother asks for computer help, I say, this is like learning a foreign language. If you don't do it every day, you won't remember how to turn it on or turn it off or troubleshoot it. And so just that sort of being persistent and really invested there in your digital literacy will really help sort of chip away at fear or the sense of being overwhelmed that there's new stuff popping up on the internet every day.
And if you think about the students that we're working with right now, they've grown up with this. There is, my 2-year-old grandson can operate this better than I can. And I think I'm a fairly tech-savvy adult, right? But I didn't grow up with it. And you'll find, like, when we worked with teachers in the K-12 system, they want, rather than just being able to pick it up and kind of figure it out, they want the steps, they want the process, they want the security, they want the safety. They want to step through how to learn it rather than just pick it up and play with it. And that's a difference in learning from that generation to this generation. This generation isn't afraid to pick it up and break it and try it. So
kids are curious, and so their curiosity drives them to master whatever you give them. So I left my 13-year-old son home for the afternoon. He was not feeling well, but I had to run some errands. And I gave him my phone on guided access, which pins only one thing on the phone. And it was it was the phone function. You can call me. I was gone for maybe an hour. And in that hour, he had changed all my ringtones. He had changed profile pictures of people and colors of things I didn't even know were possible, because he's curious, and his curiosity is driving him to know more. And as parents, we don't have curiosity about those kinds of things. And so I think, we have to tap into our kids' curiosity and borrow some of it so that we can grow in areas where we may not have realized we need to grow.
I think that the one way to become tech savvy, certainly as a parent, if you're leaning over their shoulder and you're saying, "Oh my gosh, what are you doing? Oh, you're building something?" And you're, so like, what is that? It empowers them as innovators and as creators. And I often feel that the one thing that all of us are trying to do is limit the amount of just consumption, whereas we feel very much in support of children that are creating. I think the other piece of it is what creative uses there are. For teachers and educators in the room, there's some amazing crowdsourced content knowledge pieces that you can go to where you can literally find out how different teachers are aligning, Minecraft to math, or, Twitter to whatever. I mean, so I would say search there, because that's going to give you a lot of new spaces.
How do we become tech savvy? We set all the limits, kind of keep all these balls juggling in the air as parents, educators, and professionals, and not shame kids when we feel discomfort, and not kind of go towards that, I'm going to restrict it. Like, how do you manage that?
And I think it's also kind of interesting to look through your own data, because I think maybe everyone has a little bit of shame around how often they check their phone.
Yeah.
And just like being aware of those metrics, and being aware of your own use and how the behavior you're modeling might be reflected in how your children or students are interacting with their devices could be very instructive.
But is there a way for us to take what we know as people who were offline for most of our lives and bring it into our child's online experience?
My all-time favorite parenting tool that changed my life with my kids is this TED Talk by New York Times columnist. His name is Bruce Feiler, Feiler. He's also written a book called The Happy Family. He's crunched a lot of data about what goes into making families happy, and the cornerstone of it is the weekly family meeting. And there's no technology involved in the family meeting. However, the meetings are structured around agile design, which is how some software is developed, which is meet, discuss, come up with an idea, test, and then next week reflect on what happened, iterate, go back into your life again, come back. So we do a family meeting every week, and it's amazing what kids will come up with on their own. But one part of our family meeting is technology. Even though we're low tech, kids do have they have a family iPad. We talk about screen time more than anybody's ever involved in screen time, and I hate talking about the thing that I hate more than screen time is talking about screen time. And I know I'm not supposed to say that, but it's like the constant argument. But when we do it in the family meeting, where it's sort of this safe place for all of us to talk about, we can come up with that week's media plan. Because the next week, there's going to have to be a different media plan, because it's just not going to work.
That's good.
And then the kids bust me on my own media use as well, which is good. It's for all of us to use that, to use that muscle, So I think that everybody says the conversation about screen time has to be ongoing, and it's true. It's a moving target.
Don't be afraid to be the parent, right? Have the conversations with them, help them learn, but at some point you may have to be the parent, and don't be afraid to do that, and not be their best friend all the time either.
One of the things that I'm noticing about kind of this consistency is that it's really important to not only monitor them and be curious with them, but it's also important for us as the adults in our children's lives to kind of say, okay, we have this experience that's going to help guide them a little bit better. So yes, they can teach us stuff. Yes, they can give us things, but we take what they teach us and say, okay, now how does this look for you? Would you agree, or how would you give someone who maybe is scared to do that, right? Someone who might be thinking, oh, I don't want to take my kids' stuff away. How do you give them that that confidence to say, thank you for teaching me about Snapchat. Now let me take that and give you some limits for it.
It's just exposure to what the dangers, that's this continuing conversation, right? That's just the exposure to what are the dangers of having Snapchat. And so, yes, I can send you a video that goes away in 10 seconds, but I can screenshot something in that video and I have it for the rest of the world to see, right? And they don't know those things. If they don't understand the nuances around it, they won't understand where the dangers lie.
For these kids, there isn't as much of a division between the online world and the offline world. She cites this amazing moment when these two kids were playing like Wars of Witchcraft or whatever online, and the parents said, okay, stop. And they went outside and they picked up their sticks and they continued with the story. So, even when we get into the teen years, we have to remember that they're facing their first relationship challenges online just as they do offline. And it's like, yes, we want to limit, just as we want to limit how much time you spend with one single best friend. We're looking for a balanced life. But one of the opportunities that we don't, I think, talk about enough is the opportunity when we see something that's happening online to start a conversation around it, especially when we start thinking about the empathy piece, and the potential for bullying is so much worse online than offline because you don't have the buffer of actually hearing your voice say it, right? Like we think it and we don't say it, but sometimes we type it. So there's a huge opportunity to open up a brand new conversation, I think, around empathy and around our responsibilities as just a participant in the online global world.
So I'll ask actually from that question, from that point of building empathy, how do we teach our children how to develop empathy over text and emojis and GIFs and all that? Because again, at the same time, like you said, when you type something, I might type, I hate you. And if I say it to you, like, girl, I hate you, I understand that. But if I type it, there's no emotion there. So how do we help our kids develop that emotionality or that empathy as they type things out?
Developing empathy is like people dedicate their lives to studying that.
Yes.
But I am reading a really good book called Unselfie, and I can't remember the author's
Michelle
name.
Borba.
There you go. Yes. And it is about helping your kids develop empathy, and I love, and I've started to do with my kids, how she talks about really helping them name their emotions from a young age. So, if your kid is telling you, so-and-so, hit me at recess, and, did you feel unsafe? Did that make you angry? Did it make you upset? Were you trying to defend somebody else? And, helping them to understand their own emotions is a very offline thing, I think, that happens. But what I'm getting out of that book, their phone is an extension of themselves. And so hopefully if we can start building those building blocks and helping them to self-identify their emotions, that will be something that can translate more easily.
What would you say to the parents and the educators who are starting to step into this world of being, I don't know the correct word for it, but the word of being like these digital stewards of this generation? What would you say to them, or what words of wisdom or tips do you have for us to go out into this world and become these digital stewards to kids who are digital natives?
As a kid, I was told, think before you speak. And now I think the message would be more like, think before you share. And just making sure that kids understand that what they say or do online can affect them and their friends offline, and that sometimes a text is a little bit more permanent. They might want to think of it like a tattoo, like one of those semi-permanent tattoos that kids get, where it can just, maybe if they say something that's a little cruel, it can stick around for a little bit longer, and it might be harder to repair those sorts of relationships. And just to sort of emphasize how important it is to have good judgment in this day and age, where things that are put online can stay around for a while, and also to emphasize that more foresight is needed, since there are platforms where more people can be reached and things can be shared more widely.
We have an opportunity to create, and in that opportunity to create, we're all innovators. And so I think while we talk about, all the harmful things, I love Josh's messaging at the very beginning where he talked about the need for positivity. And positivity and negativity bubble to the top, but positivity should win, right? So I like the idea of empowering kids when they compliment someone else online, like that was a positive outcome for them being online, and encouraging that.
I think about when I was a kid, there were parameters that I understood about what was safe in my neighborhood, as you suggested, and those broaden as you grow and become more mature because your judgment becomes better. But when you become an adolescent, sometimes your judgment is impaired. And so to really, take very seriously those preteen years, big time. And so if we take the long view of it, that it's not always going to be fixed in a conversation, but stewarding them is, deposits over time when there's not high emotions, and then you see the fruit of that coming up, and you have to just patiently work that land.
No, I agree with that. I've seen that with my own kids too, the things that you model, because they won't do what you tell them to do, they'll do what they see you do. You just have to grow, and you have to understand that we've actually, we have always preached in education this notion of lifelong learning, that you need to be a lifelong learner. And with this tool that we now have, whether it's your phone, your iPad, your computer, we truly have a society that will enable that. And so I can learn to paint, I can learn to roller skate, I can learn the concepts of riding a motorcycle online, and I can get that just-in-time learning because somebody's probably created some video somewhere for me to do that, right, or some article, and so take the good, right?
One thing that I've just found really successful, and sometimes it's sort of unsolicited, but I've been really trying to get parents in a space where I can say, can I help you with that? And I say sometimes it's unsolicited because sometimes parents will complain to me, my kid did this and that and the other thing on their phone, and I'm like, well, do you have parental controls on your phone? And they're like, no. I'm like, give me your phone. I mean, they really just, I think a lot of parents, that my peers in the elementary school and middle school car line, they want someone to show them. They need someone to take their hand. So I would say, in whatever way you find available for your company, the hands-on things that we're doing with parents have been incredibly successful. Even if it's 4 parents, I did one 2 weeks ago, 4 moms in a living room, and we called it a lockdown party. And everybody brought their devices because that lowers the fears. If you're going to walk me through it, okay, now I can do it. So whatever that looks like for you guys, but if you can provide some of that hands-on help, I think it goes a long way.
I think one of the things too is this idea of having to do too much as a parent. So I think sometimes parents, they feel like they're busy because I've got to make sure they eat, sleep, get their homework done, put their clothes on, don't die. Like I have to do all of this, and I also have to figure out how to use this iPhone. So I think one of the things to do is to acknowledge that when we're talking to our parents and let them know, okay, what is it that you'd like to know today? So instead of saying, go educate yourself, right, saying, what would you like to know today? Well, I don't know how to put the parental controls on, or my iPhones and my iPads are great, but how do you do, the parental controls for Netflix and Hulu? Like these are how I know for a lot of times my parents don't know how to deal with the game systems. So almost all the game consoles you can get online with now, and they're like, how did my kid talk to someone in Istanbul on their Xbox? Right. Well, this is how they did it, and then we'll talk about it that way. So I think for us as people who are in this field is to not just say, hey, here's some stuff, go look, to say, hey, it sounds like you're really stressed out. What do you want to know? And then that person will say, I want to know about Netflix controls, and then I'll give you that information. You'll go fix it and then come back and say, give me more. And that's what I've noticed has been really helpful to kind of lower that barrier of where do I start?
Well, I went through a training program with a group of elementary school teachers over the course of 3 years, and the first thing that they needed to know was how to use it themselves for their own personal use. Okay. They had to understand how it would be beneficial for them, and then they could move on to how could they put it in place for students, or how could they put it in a lesson, right? How could they create a true module that is integrated with technology? And so oftentimes if you can catch people where their fear is the most, that's when they're emotionally invested, that's where you're going to get the knowledge transferred.
I do get some tech calls where, what can I do for this setting? And I hear the screaming in the background, and I think, there's no product. You need to take that device away and return it to the store and revisit next year.
And if they're not using the device that you gave them, they're going to get on somebody else's device too, right, and use their own profile on somebody else's device.
You remember when there was like the Tickle Me Elmo, and there were those those buzz toys every Christmas. I feel like that's kind of what we have now, but instead of it being Christmas, it's every day. There's a buzz app. And so I feel like, maybe you guys can weigh in. How do you manage the kids who are like, before you used to be like, Mom, I want this bubble gum, but you could say, let's get out of the store, and then they can't have the bubble gum. But now you can say, no, we're not going to do that app, but they can still download. There's no way to get away from it. Like, you could leave the toy store and they won't get that toy. Yeah. There's nothing you can do now. So how would you say, how can you help parents who have a kid that's like, I want this app, everyone has it, and you're thinking, let's reflect, but you can't. What can you do there?
I mean, there's tons of third-party apps that prevent your kids from downloading anything without your permission. I mean, that's a standard feature.
I think kids are smart, and so if you engage them in conversation, like, how do you think this app could be used for good? How do you think it could be used for evil? Or simple questions like, what did you see online this week that made you happy? What did you see online this week that made you sad? And really get your own kid thinking deeply about potential negatives and potential positives of things that they want to engage in and be part of. Yeah. I think it can sort of like preempt a lot of the problematic uses of some of the apps that kids are using.
The World Economic Forum looked at how to be a good digital citizen, and they have 8 areas, and I would just say that if I can just read these 8 areas, I think this is what we need to talk to our kids about. Like, what is your digital identity? What does privacy management mean? Why should we be thinking critically about going online? What is your digital footprint, and what will it look like to your future employers or college? What is digital empathy? What is cybersecurity, cyberbullying, and finally, screen time? And if you ask these kids, what do you think is appropriate around these pieces, you're gonna have so much great potential for conversation and solutions. Honestly, all we're trying to do is design solutions that work with our students and with our families. And then finally, the work I do is around students that are innovating or creating change, typically social change, but I have seen innovation after innovation around how do we create the buddy bench in school so that kids aren't left out? How do we create a safe place where kids can come online? There's this one kid that created a Twitter feed around saying something positive about other students because he was sort of upset about the bashing that was happening. So the ramifications happen through peer-to-peer interactions. And we have to empower our young people to have a voice to recognize when something's wrong, point it out, and then create that positive change.
I actually teach a lot of my kids, especially the ones who do a lot of online gaming and online stuff like that, to report things, because when you report things, it's always anonymous. So it's different than if I go tell a teacher, someone knows I told the teacher. I still encourage them to do that. But online, if you are in a school setting or if you see something where another student is being bullied, you can always report things. You can actually click report, and it goes to Facebook, it goes to Instagram, it does that. And then you can also let people know, hey, I don't know who did it, but maybe you want to check out Mercedes' page, or I don't know what's going on, but maybe you want to check out Liz's page. Like, you can give our kids the empowerment to say, something's not okay here. I don't want to be a tattletale, so to speak, but at the same time, I want to point it out. So I think that's one way to have that discussion with their kid. It's the same thing I would tell kids with bullies. If you see bullying happening, you don't have to jump in. Don't take out your phone and start filming it. Go find somebody to get help. The same thing you would tell them face to face. I feel like we tell them that online too. If you see a comment, and I'm not talking about like on BuzzFeed comment, there's nothing, unfortunately, we can do about that kind of accountability. But I think if there are kids and you see your friends making comments on somebody else's page, to say something, report it. You can report malicious content on Facebook and Instagram and all of that stuff. And on Xbox and PlayStation 4, you can report users who come on, begin to harass everyone else in the playing field. You can go ahead and click that, report that user, and they'll get booted off. So, I think we need to, again, go back to that idea of empowering our kids that when you see things, here are the mechanisms for reporting these posts and these users.
Kids need to understand too that what people post on Facebook is your best day, right? And my worst day is not going to look anything like your best day on Facebook, right? And so they when things are bad like that do happen, they have to understand that that somebody reacting maybe on their worst day. And if it's a comment you don't like, you have the right to report it, but you also have the right to remove it and to block that friend. And it's okay to do that. If that friend's not somebody who's adding value to your life, walk away.
I think just reinventing the conversation about the meaning of the word friend is humongous. And as parents, we model that for our kids. So I, tell my kids, the people who are in my friend feed are actually my friends. They're people I know.
I want to talk to.
Yeah.
I want to hang out with. They're good people.
Yeah, and I do have a public, persona that I can connect to strangers.